But I just wanted to say hello and thank you all for coming, to congratulate all the people who got the back row seats so quickly. Good job. But also to say that what we would like to do with this session, which is our spring continuing budget discussion, and so many of you were at the fall discussions, and this is, as I've come to understand, it's just a part of our ongoing transparency and discussion with the campus about the budget, which of course is a central topic for us. And what we will be doing today, we have about a half an hour's worth of presentation, but we're going to try letting it be interactive with you all as we go. So if you have questions or want clarification or even have a comment during the presentation, please just raise your hand and we'll start to try to figure out how to have that conversation. If it looks like we're really going to run out of time, that is if we get so engrossed in a particular slide and the particular conversation around it, we may try to move it. But let's try that this time to see how we do. And so I think we will start. Can you hear me pretty well in the back? Okay. I don't know how it's working with this, but it's okay. So we will go ahead and get started. So again, as I mentioned, it's our spring update, and we will tell you where we were in November a little bit, and then, or October, whenever we did it, and move forward. But what I like to do with this slide, and we've been using this slide with the Board of Trustees committees that we've spoken with, to just try to signal and repeatedly create some understanding among all the groups listening to us about what a vibrant university this is, about how much is going on, how many wonderful initiatives and activities we have in all of our major areas of focus, certainly in fostering learner success, in creating and discovering for Maine and beyond, and innovating, and also in our partnerships areas. So we're looking to continue to build up our storehouse of excellent examples of what's happening here at the university and to communicate that more fully. We can probably go to the next one. Mics are ready? Okay, good.
No.
So can you see the screen okay? Like, I can darken it completely.
It's a little walking out.
Say that again.
I broke the microphone, sorry.
I think I can start. This slide is really going to show, first of all, the budget comparison. So we're going right into budget. So this is a preview of what we're going to see at the very end. So this is comparing This is comparing FY19 and FY20 in revenue. It's a very busy slide, but I'll break it down later on. It's comparing revenues for, this isn't working. It's comparing revenues for 19 and 20 and expenses for 19 and 20 in large buckets. So stay tuned, this is a preview. We'll break it down a little bit later. The next slide you've seen, we presented this one in the fall presentation. It just places our campus budget process within the whole state of Maine budget cycle. So we get state appropriation from the state of Maine, and back in the fall, the Board of Trustees presented a state budget request. The governor presented her budget in January, and here we are in the spring of 2019, where there are work sessions and advocacy, and hopefully the legislature will sign into legislation a budget for 2020 and 2021, which is the year we're doing fiscal year 20. And our fiscal year 20 assumes a state appropriation increase that needs to be signed off by the state. The next slide shows our timeline. You're used to this timeline, and here we are. We started here in November, and here we are in April. We're on April 9th. We've gone through an initial presentation with board leadership back in January. We've had our budget, the first public presentation to the FFT back on March 19th. And here we are presenting you with basically our budget for FY20 as it stands right now and discussing it with you. Here we are on April 9th. I'll come over. Can you hear me? Am I talking loud enough for now? I'll get my note. Your turn. I'll go get my note.
Okay, so I'm going to review some things that we covered in November, just some basic ideas about
well, first, conceptually how to build a budget, and then show you some numbers that reflect where we were in November. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what we did between November and now to try to, to balance the budget and relate that to our strategic thinking. So when we think about building the budget, we have to start with things that are fixed, we don't control. And so when we talk about tuition and fees, what we mean here is that the tuition and fee rate is not something that we have control over. It's set by the Board of Trustees. And so we are given numbers to plan with, a percentage increase that they anticipate making. And of course, as much as we would like to, we don't control the state appropriation. That's through a magical process through the legislature that comes out with an appropriation to the University of Maine system that now goes through another magical process and comes out with our portion of that. But we're given a number that we're working with the legislature that we believe is a realistic number will come out of the budget, and that's worked through the system formula. And so we have ideas about what this will be. Our point is that it's fixed in the sense that there's nothing we can do on this campus once it's set to change it. These are then our sources of revenue. There are some things that are fixed that are sources of our expenses. Our largest expenses, of course, is salary and benefits, compensation, and those are the lion's share of those, 95+%, are determined through collective bargaining with the 6 unions. So there's a process going on now for bargaining with the unions. Once again, we're given some numbers that we're asked to build. These are the estimates or the ideas of where the bargaining is going to end up. And if you ask me, well, what's the bargaining, what were we asked to estimate for increases? I'm not going to tell you, but we have a number and it's set, and so that's what we have to work with. And then there are some things that are operational increases. One is the shared services model we have with the University of Maine system. That's determined what the costs are that go through a formula. There are some other fixed operational increases that we have, fuel expenses, et cetera, that we can't impact. Then we think of it, as we're building the budget, the other side of it is being the revenues and expenses that we have more control or at least impact on. And so the tuition and fees here refers to how much, the size of our entering class and how much tuition and fees we generate through enrollment. And what's reasonable for us to expect. What can we do to increase those numbers? What can we do to impact that part of the budget? Indirect cost recovery, a piece of our budget, our base budget, that has to do with the research expenses that are expenses made during the year. So what kind of granting activities, what can our research community do to bring in additional funds, to spend additional funds to produce more indirect cost recovery that feeds into the university's budget. Then we have a whole, and Dan's here, a whole set of enterprises that fall under the label of auxiliaries. And auxiliaries run separate from the E&G budget. It's not part of the E&G budget, but we have such a successful auxiliary operation that it helps with the E&G budget. That is, every year some funds are moved over from auxiliaries into the E&G budget to help run the institution. And so we have some impact over how much money we move over, keeping auxiliaries as an independent operation that can run and sustain itself. How much money can we move over to support E&G salary benefits, financial aid, et cetera. And then on the expense side, there are investments. Primarily we're thinking about the flexible areas. These are really areas we want to invest in. So there's a variety of positions, faculty and staff positions that we want to invest in. There are operational expenses, things we want to do to improve the campus, to improve our operation. And then there's a great deal of funds that we look at in terms of scholarships and grants. We're very focused on reducing student debt and student costs. We're also very focused on being competitive in the enrollment atmosphere, the enrollment area. And so we make investments in scholarships so we can be competitive, we can still have a net positive revenue, and we can work to keep costs down for students. So, what happens then with real numbers? Well, the fixed revenues, the assumptions made about what will happen with tuition rate increase and state appropriation, what this is a delta. This is nowhere near the total amount we get from tuition and state appropriation, but it's the increase over the prior fiscal year. So basically, we're anticipating those sources and another roughly $4 million in revenue above what we had in this fiscal year. Then we looked at our expenses, and again, the assumptions that we were given to build the budget, we anticipate expenses of almost $6 million increase above what we had for the prior year. So then we go over and look at what are our flexible areas, what are the areas that we can impact. Well, we believe that we can grow revenues through looking at primarily the big driver being enrollment, and what we can do in enrollment to grow enrollment, but also an indirect cost recovery to grow our revenues. And we believe we can build a delta or an increase over the prior year of just over $6 million. This is where we were in November. And then we looked at the investments that we wanted to, or depending on your perspective, needed to make, and they ran around $5 million. So if you put those pieces together back in November, when we were first building the FY20 incremental budget, we looked at the revenues, the fixed and the flexible, took away the expenses, and we had a gap of about $1.65 million. And that's what we shared with you in November. And for those of you who have great memory, we talked then about, well, what could we do to shrink that gap? We have, and we had to again this year go out and make some adjustments to budgets, some cuts to budgets to balance it. But we also talked about revenue and what we can do as an institution to grow revenue to close that gap. And so our final solution, to kind of foreshadow where we're headed, is that we close the gap in a combination of, I think, responsibly thinking about how we could grow revenues in some areas, and then closing the rest of the gap with some reductions to the budget.
So, first of all, we should pause. Are there questions about anything you've seen so far? Any place you'd like us to go back and go through again?
Yeah, no.
So just to clarify on the last slide, that was from November,
Yeah.
right? So what you're saying is that at this point, we actually have a projected balanced budget due to adjustments made.
That's right. Yeah.
Right, so our process is to kind of keep you posted on where we are as we go along, and it's definitely balanced, and we'll talk about where we've put investment and where we've had to take reductions to do that. And so the next slide then, or other questions, I guess.
We wanted to repeat that just to build the excitement.
Right. I want to congratulate Provost Hecker and everyone who is working so diligently on the strategic vision and values activity, which is completely related to our budget work. And people know that our values and our strategic directions should be driving our budget decisions. And these are, syncing up now quite nicely as we're settling in on our 3 strategic values: fostering learner success, creating and innovating for Maine and beyond, growing and stewarding partnerships. And in fact, we have sessions coming up next week. Are they both next week?
Next week on Monday, we'll have a whole session about thinking about goals under each of these strategic values and strategies for achieving those goals.
So this is a kind of transition year because we started our budget process back in July. We started this work really in September, and so we are doing our best to kind of keep them on the same track now, but the idea is that it's our vision and values that drive our budgetary decisions, and so I wanted to just remind everyone of what those are, and that will be more refined in the next round as we prepare our 2021 budget. But at this point, I think what I would want to highlight too about constructing this budget for fiscal 20 is the following, and that is, these are tight budgets. That's not surprising. At the same time, though, we have to be able to make space within our budgeting to try new things, to move in new directions, to add innovations. And so you will see how that's happening, and the Provost will go on in the next few slides to talk to you about places where we are figuring out a way to either protect certain areas that are growing and that are well aligned with these vision values areas, and or to even grow a few places. So this is all important for you to know because it helps you understand the big picture in which we're putting this budget together. And,
Yeah, so we'll start with just some examples. This is in no way a comprehensive list, but just give you a sense of examples of the areas that are investments in the FY20 budget as they align with our strategic values. So of course, a big part of our budget is compensation, and looking at and increasing faculty and staff compensation is part of the way we keep good people here and reward people. Again, it would relate to any of our values, but in this area we're focusing on learner success. Adding new faculty lines, we've added faculty lines centrally in some areas. We've converted some areas that were fixed length to base budgeted positions. We've made them fixed length to make investments in areas where we had growing enrollment. And now we see that the growth has stabilized. We've turned those over into base budgeted investments. We made investments in graduate student stipends. We're increasing the amount to keep us, to make us more competitive. We also, of course, invested quite a bit of funds in undergraduate and graduate scholarships. Part of our vision for the university is to be competitive with the brightest students, certainly in the state of Maine, but also outside. And part of that is offering competitive financial aid packages. At the same time, looking at our need-based packages to meet our mission for serving qualified students with need. And then, of course, we're making investments in classroom renovations in other areas. The EEDC, for those not in the top of the list in the acronym world, is the Engineering Education and Design Center. This will be a significant impact on this campus. Strong support from the legislature. We will be doing some borrowing, and we're putting funds into debt service to pay on that loan to build this big new beautiful building. One of our other, of course, strategic values is growing and stewarding partnerships. And I just gave pulled out some examples of investments that we're making to help foster and develop partnerships. A significant initiative is growing the Maine Center for Graduate and Professional Studies. This is a center in Portland. That's a collaboration between us and the University of Southern Maine and the University of Maine Law School. And the lead piece of it is the Graduate School of Business. And so we're making investments in the Graduate School of Business. We've made some investments with the help of a funding agent. The Alpine Foundation has helped us make some of these investments. But we have made a commitment to move these to base funding so they're covered in FY20, but we have to start the planning process of moving them to base budget, and we start that in this year. The Office of Innovation and Economic Development, led by Vice President Jake Ward, is a key piece in developing and fostering our relationships with business and industry. We have a tremendous number of relationships. I think over 600 companies, Jake, right now have connections with the University of Maine. We've put in a concentrated effort over the last few years into understanding what businesses need from the university, and through looking at our own internal processes about how we can facilitate faculty and staff connecting with business and industry to meet their needs and to help fund our research and development operations. So in this sense, we've spared this office from any cutting so they can continue with this work. Early college is another initiative that's a form of partnerships with K-12. We've got a few new initiatives around building relationships with students who are in high school so that they can earn the University of Maine credits while they're in high school. And we're developing our pathways for that would lead them into the university and to have an impact on their level of preparation when they get here through the early college. So again, I give these as some examples under each of these strategic values of where we're making investments. And then President Freeman, you were going to talk about the investments in
Sure. So our strategic value about creating and innovating for Maine and beyond, which encompasses the creative work, the scholarship, the research aspects of our campus. We are looking very carefully at our F&A costs, or some of you know that better as indirect cost recovery, and looking for ways to be certain that we will be able to get more of that invested back into work that's close to the research, some of that back to PIs. And we have increased the budget there in our plans based on our fall conversation when we talked with you about the fact that that's a place where we have some opportunity to control things a bit. It amounts to being able to get more grants submitted and being more successful, and we've already got excellent progress just in this fiscal year in that area, and then spending on those grants, making sure that we expend the dollars so that the IDC comes back. So that's a key area for fiscal 20 and beyond. We continue to ensure that the library is able to acquire the resources needed for instruction, for research, and for the community. We continue to make sure we invest as needed in facilities and infrastructure improvements as required. We need to be able to include, of course, infrastructure that is supportive of our research and creative activity endeavors, and so that's a piece of how 20 is based. How the 20 budget is calling on, or will reflect that kind of commitment. And then finally, some of you have followed, I hope, the fact that we were asked by the system to create a University of Maine system strategic plan for research and development that will actually, we believe, get its final okay from the Board of Trustees in May, but which includes a number of very specific campus kinds of initiatives that we can take to improve the health of our research enterprise, to support our researchers and scholars more fully. And so that is showing up here because it's a part of what will drive forward the creating and innovating for Maine and beyond. And I think you're next, Claire. But we can ask if you have questions, because that was sort of the end of a section too.
And I haven't tried the microphone, it's working. So the next section is, what is it we're incrementally funding in FY20? So this is an E&G, an educational and general budget. We're just focusing on the E&G budget right now. So these are the amounts that we increased across the university, amounting to about $12.2 million. They're basically compensation, they're shared services and fuel and electricity. You can read the areas as they're described here. This is more infrastructure increases. And the next slide shows that if we were going to incrementally fund with this amount, we needed to go back to where we were in November. And we were at a gap, we were at a structural gap of $1.65 million. And we had a discussion in November as to what we might do to mitigate that gap, both on the revenue and on the expense side. And we talked about increasing undergraduate enrollment. And we had slides showing going up to 2,400 for an incoming class, or even perhaps 2,450. We actually settled on, after discussions with the Provost and Vice President Lizzie Wahab, which I know she's here somewhere. I saw her. Where is she? There she is. Okay. We committed to having an incoming class of 2,375, which was plus 25 up from where we had enrollment when we were at the 1.65. We also had discussed, well, what would happen if we increased our retention rate? And I think we had discussed the 1 to 3%. We settled on 1%. I verified these numbers with Deb Allen yesterday. We'd like to go up from a 77% retention rate from first year to second year to 78%, which is a 1% increase. We also looked at our fall online graduate students and the programs that they're in, including the Masters in Business Administration, as well as the Gold program. And we increased the headcount, the fall headcount, by 20. In the 1.65 million, we had already adjusted the facilities and administrative recovery, the ICR, from 500 we had increased it by 500. we did an additional increase of $100,000. So the F&A recovery in FY20 is going from 8.4 million to 9 million. So the final, on the revenue side, the final realignment gap was dropped down to $850,000.
All right, so now I get to tell you how we balance that out. First, I want to point out that Larry has a tendency to exaggerate the negative. It's actually only $849,000.
I'm usually precise.
Yeah, so that we have, yeah. So what we have, so these are the broad areas where we looked at accounting for this. The biggest area of the university's budget is academic affairs, and so just to give you the reference, that's the size of the budget for the E&G budget for academic affairs. And we were asked to manage a $673,050 budget cut. That's 0.4% of this overall budget. Research and graduate school with a much smaller budget was asked to do quite a small, only 0.1% of its budget. We worked hard. I was actually trying to spare research and graduate education completely from the cut, but it's a zero sum, and it worked out to a very small cut. I think that reflects our thinking about where we want to grow and one of our strategic directions. With the student affairs area, with a $6 million budget, we cut $36,000. This is 0.6 cut, so it made it look like, well, we don't really care about academic affairs before Dean Dana jumps up in protest. He knows that actually the way we did this is a slightly higher percentage, because what we're able to do, and this has been part of the plan all along, is to move some funds off of the E&G onto revenue from the rec center. The rec center was built quite a while ago and has a model for generating revenue from the university and also from others who join the rec center, and it's been following on that. So what we're able to do is take a position that was funded through E&G and move a portion of that funding over to the revenue part of the budget. So it was a reduction in the E&G that amounted to 0.6%. But most of that, or a chunk of that, was due to be able to move funds to a revenue source. So it wasn't no one lost their job or had their hours reduced, but we had to, we moved the source of the funding. The president's area, which is a variety of areas, including athletics, the president's office, the Collins Center for the Arts, the Children's Center, I took a portion of the budget cut of 0.4%. Administration and facilities is some Claire's area and is a lot of things. Took this proportional cut. Here are the areas that we spared, if you will, from cutting. Our advancement operations, we did not make any cuts to the fundraising operation. It was important to the university's future to continue to have funds coming in from private sources, so that was completely spared. And then institutional finance was also. Now some of these are fixed costs, like shared services, but others are, and so I'll give you an example, shared services, insurance, and debt service are not things we can change. There are some things that are investments that we think are important, so under this heading of student support, one of the areas that's in institutional finance, for example, is graduate student tuition. So when a researcher gets a grant and covers graduate student tuition, we allow them to cover it at the in-state rate, but we actually cover that gap in real money to cover the out-of-state rate if they're from out-of-state. We pay 50% of graduate students' health insurance that falls under this heading. There are some waivers for international students. Those sorts of things fall under institutional finance. Within academic affairs, this cut was distributed amongst the colleges and other areas that report within academic affairs. But just to illustrate ways we were thinking, we didn't do this as an across the board. We did not cut our enrollment management operations at all. They're central to our success, and they're central to the growing of the budget. We did not, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't cut the area of innovation and economic development. The Maine Business School has the most rapidest, probably not a word, the quickest, the fastest, the largest growing enrollment over the last several years and is on track going forward, so we did not cut the main business school budget. And then, of course, the remaining areas that we had to figure out what portion they were to take of the budget cut. And we did that primarily proportional to the size of their budget, but we also did look at enrollment trends and also areas where we were making investments to make final decisions about how to close this gap. So this gap has been closed, and thanks to the deans and the vice presidents who actually had to then do the work. They were assigned a number from me, and they had to then figure out how to balance their budgets with that alignment that we're going to them. So one question that to think about is what did this impact in terms of the human capital here at the university? So I wanted to share with you kind of the net impact on personnel. So I'll start with the faculty line. And again, I want you to understand this correctly. This is not all the activity that we're doing in the faculty arena. So any college is doing a variety of hiring with the funds they have available through vacancies. And there's quite a bit of hiring going on now around the campus. This is sort of the combination or the impact of the budget reductions that they would need to be made and our investments. So if you look at the faculty line, one faculty vacancy wasn't filled, and then 0.52, or pieces of faculty lines for people who are retiring were not filled. But then centrally, we did invest 6.27 FTE, or 6 full lines, and the 0.27 is where a faculty line is funded through a variety of sources. So like a cooperative extension has partial funding from E&G and partial funding elsewhere. So that's, we're not hiring 0.27 per person. But we made this investments, and so overall we'll have a net growth of 4.75 faculty lines at the University of Maine. Now, that's actually a conservative estimate of the number of lines. You look within colleges, they'll take retirements and replace positions, and often they can take 2 retirements at a higher salary and create 3 positions. So that's not the entire picture. But with respect to changes that were directed from central administration, cuts in investments, it's a net gain of 4.75. Broad variety of things we call under the heading of adjunct or part-time. It came up to a net 0.09. We invested part of the position, and part of the position was left vacant. A little bit of professional positions were left vacant. This 0.47, that's the position in student affairs that got moved from E&G to revenue that portion of that person's lines. It's really not a reduction of the line. The line of the person is still there, but the line is no longer E&G funded. We did make investments in professional lines for net loss there, and then we invested a quarter of a classified position. So overall, for the personnel at the university, with the changes we made with budget realignment and investments, we netted a growth of 3.6 positions.
So I'll move over to this teaser slide that I showed at the beginning of the presentation to try to put together where we went from FY19 to FY20. So let's break this one apart and look at revenue only. So if you compare FY19, we were at that $281.7 million revenue. If we add what we gained, so moving down to FY20, if we add what we gained in tuition and fees by a 2.5% increase in tuition, and by calculating limited credit hours on the incoming class and the retention rate, we have a tuition and fees budget of $180.3 million in FY20 compared to $169 million in FY19. The unrestricted state appropriation grew from 83.5 to 84 million from FY19 to FY20. Notice that even though it grew, it's becoming less of a percentage of our total revenue budget as our tuition and fees grow due to our enrollment growth. This sales and transfers and other in FY19 was 7.4% of that revenue budget at $20.8 billion. In FY20, it's 7.1 at $21 million. F&A recovery, as I had indicated earlier, goes up by 0.6. So F&A recovery is even going up by 0.6 is 3.1% compared to 3% in FY19. I need to stop. If there are any questions, we haven't asked questions. I can move forward.
Claire.
There, yes.
Hey, sorry, I don't mean to take so many steps back here, but we were looking at, just trying to understand kind of where the deficit's coming from and, you know, where our starting point was. I noticed in one of the slides that Jeff presented about fixed and flexible costs.
Yeah, find it.
I'll go make that.
There was, I can easily understand the top part with the revenue that we have. So we had fixed revenue of 4.2 million and flexible revenue of 6.1, which definitely comes out to the 10.3 there. But on the bottom, is there possibly something that's not represented in the total down there for the 11.9? Because I could have just added these wrong, but I get about 10.9 million on the bottom part. Is there possibly something that's not like represented in the fixed and flexible expenses?
I'd have to go back. I mean, this is from a spreadsheet that we had back in November, but I can get back to you definitely on that.
Okay, thank you.
So you're saying 11,983, 161 extra?
I don't think that's what he's saying. I think he's saying that should be 10. But then I
Right,
have to go
right,
back
yeah.
to mine. I have to go back.
Yeah, maybe you just found $1 million.
Yeah. We just fixed the budget.
It's in your budget. It's in your budget. Yeah, I'll go
So
back.
he's from enrollment management.
Were you at the November meeting?
What's that?
Were you at the November meeting?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll get back to you on
Okay.
that. We probably forgot something in one of these cells.
Okay.
We were changing things quite a bit in November.
Oh, I understand, it happens, so.
It's good.
I just didn't know if there was something
Good
that.
catch.
No, thank you.
It's a very
Thank
good
you.
catch.
Yeah.
Thank you very
And
much.
you won't believe how many people have seen this slide. You were the very first one.
Thank
Take the
you.
time to do this. I think I saw another question. Was there another question?
So let me go to the slide that I was on.
I'll look for that.
Is it good? Okay.
The one needs to
18.
change to 650,000.
Say that again?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's in the revenue. So I'm doing the same thing with the expenditures. So in FY19, we have $281.7 million here. And basically it's compensation. And I've broken it out in three basic buckets. Compensation and benefits, institutional aid, and other. So 281.7 in FY19 and 294.3 in FY20. Compensation goes up, but again, it becomes a smaller percentage of the entire budget. It does increase. There is a benefit, which is it's significant for the University of Maine. There will be a benefit change going into FY20 that's 0.2 percentage points lower than it was in FY19. If salaries go up, the benefit costs go down because it's based on the total compensation. Institutional aid was at 51.4 in this fiscal year, going up to 56.9, 18.2% in 2019, 19.3 in FY20. All other, 65.4, going up to 67.2. So the all other is broken down in broad categories. So this 23.3%, and Mike, you can add this up. This one really adds up. In broad categories, all other make up fuel, electricity, capital debt, library acquisition, shared services, and these are the numbers for FY20. Now, I know the 19.8 and the 20 million looks like a lot of money for but included in this 19.8 are insurances, supplies, other utilities, water, sewer, and a host of other costs that are embedded in the expenditure budget. So this puts it all together. This is probably the original slide minus that was the teaser slide at the beginning of the presentation. And this basically compares 81 FY19 with FY20. Are there any questions before I move on? Can someone add this up, make sure I'm right?
Those other numbers are smaller. This is a lot.
I know. No, I'll go back to, I'll try to find it just now.
We're going to shift to start talking about the future a little bit. So any questions on anything that we've talked about so far? We have to run through our numbers.
The role of the foundation in supporting things like institutional aid and the like, any separate accounting of that, or is that outside of these charts?
You want to comment? The funds we get from financial aid.
So, I mean, institutional aid is a very large chunk, and then we also have these scholarships that come from the foundation and
Right. The institutional aid is the scholarships that are given from E&G sources. So you have funds that are located in the Office of Financial Aid, as well as athletic scholarships. They're all E&G. In addition to that $60 million, or $56.9 million that you see there, 56.9, excuse me, that you see there, are other restricted scholarships that come forward from the foundation and from the University of Maine system, which are located in restricted funds that are outside of the E&G. So this is not all of the aid that's given to students.
Connie, do you have a ballpark about that number? Just put you on the spot.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I'm thinking somewhere around 8 million-ish.
So one thing that happens, of course, is the foundation does an annual report, an annual fiscal report. And I don't know if we traditionally do that as an open campus discussion, but we could. I mean, we could have a presentation for people who are interested.
I think that would actually be a really
Keeping
great
on the
idea.
foundation,
Okay.
so you have I think it was advancement as an expense, so is that funding to drive what the foundation is bringing in?
So so we have an agreement with the foundation that we fund positions that are actually in the foundation. There's an arrangement that we made a few years ago to streamline the operation, get to be more coordinated. We used to have a foundation and a development office. We've integrated those two. We, the university, continues to pay the salary and benefits for that piece, plus some operational support. So that it's in our E&G budget, but it is used to support those positions.
And so does anything come in from the foundation on the revenue side for operations, or is that the separate piece on the?
It's not represented in here. There are things that come over. Yeah, they tend to be at the control of even college department unit levels. They have to do with how some of at the library level. That has to do with the donor's intent. So yeah, it's not reflected in here, and it doesn't. Well, some of it comes. So some of the foundation money comes directly to financial aid to use. Some of the money goes to units to use. One of the things one thing we are trying to do is work with the foundation to work with our officers to have more funds go centrally. We love being able to have chairs and deans recognize outstanding students, but to have a bigger impact on the institution if we use those funds to recruit students into the university with competitive financial aid packages.
I think some of the additional context there is that we're in the middle or nearing the end really of a capital campaign with the foundation, which gets set up with very clear goals and where dollars will go and so forth, including, of course, the new engineering building, which is a big chunk of their effort right now. And so as we come to the end of that and discuss what will be next and will there be another capital campaign and on what time frame, I think these are the sorts of questions that we can be talking about quite publicly.
Other questions? The 2020 budget. We do want to show a nice spring picture today. About new beginnings, but we want to talk about the budget planning process never ends. It's always going, and we have we're always thinking about the future of the university, and our initiatives are any one of our initiatives have budget implications and are ties to budget decisions. So we want to just talk you through a little bit. Again, these are just examples again of thinking into next year and beyond of things that are priorities and emerging priorities as we look at our budget. So most of you know we've been paying a lot of attention this year to our first year student success. You saw that we have cautiously bumped up our first year student retention number by 1% in building our budget. So we're already anticipating some impact. And most of what we've been doing this year has been planning, although we have engaged in some things focused directly on first year student success that I think justify that 1% increase. But we have higher ambitions for that. I would like to get our first year student success, our first year student retention up to around 85%. And I think that's very doable for our institution. So we're, I'd say increased by 5%. The key thing in that is looking at the gaps we have. If we look at students who are Pell eligible, we don't do as well in keeping them. There's about a 5 or 6 percentage point gap there. If we can close that gap, that would impact the overall gap. We look at underrepresented students from underrepresented groups. There's a gap between them and the students who are not from those groups. We can close that gap. We can get there. And so we've got, I think everyone knows, we've got teams out there working on this. We're going to have another convening of these folks next week, and then they'll be giving plans forward for one of the areas we want to invest in for supporting student financial aid. The President and I and Claire have had conversations about that. My assignment is to take all that information, work with folks to try to make some sense of it and prioritize, and go in June as we look at FY20 to make some investments that won't be in our base budget. They'll be based on one-time or reserve funds that we would anticipate then in our 21 budget convert to base. That would be impact on there. And again, just in terms of your this is an expense, but it also relates to the success, our success in our mission, and it relates to our financial success. So, doing quick math, if we improve the retention rate by 5%, that's $1.5 million roughly revenue in 1 year. If we sustain that over 4 years, it's about $4.5 million and $5 million of revenue. So it's good for the students, it's good for us as an institution, and it's also good for our bottom line. So that's one of the areas we're focusing on. It's obviously a clear example of the way we're acting upon our value of fostering learner success. It's one example of that. Other things that we're doing, we've got some folks thinking about novel programs, enhancing areas related to digital engineering and health. There's some things going on around the state that are related to that. President Ferrini-Mundy has brought some faculty together, challenged them to think a little bit about new and innovative type programs that are early stages. Further development involving a bachelor's in statistics. That's a real need in the state of New England. There's lots of opportunities for folks with that degree. We're looking at expanding the flagship internship program. That's been a way for us to, it's part of our building partnerships with industry, but it's also about fostering learner success. We want our students to come here and have experiences that where they're developing work-ready skills while they're students here. And the flagship internship is a model for that. I think it's been successful. What we need to do now is to expand that. And we're involved in some things where the University of Maine has taken the lead through our Engaged BlackBerry initiative. And that's our digital badging initiative. But the state and beyond the state, there's a great deal of interest in that. And one of the areas of focus in higher education is around certificates of values or credentials of values, things that are not a degree, but are recognized by industry and others as being of value. And so actually, since we had taken the lead, and I give Claire Sullivan, faculty member, credit for really getting us a real head start in that, we're recognized now as the state leaders. And so Claire's been asked by the University of Maine system to lead an effort to look at how we can develop contemporary approaches to identifying and rewarding students with credentials of value. But again, sort of a different way of thinking about fostering learner success. Yes, we want students here. Yes, we want to produce degrees, but we also want them to develop these kind of credentials. And we want to open our doors. They're open, but we want to make sure people are taking advantage of our open doors who are not traditional students to come here and get connect with the university to get or earn credentials of value. And I'm going to turn this over to the president. Go into student partnerships. I think you're Ms. Holmes.
So a second value, of course, for us, growing and stewarding partnerships. There's been a lot of work done already on explaining why that's important for us as a university. First and foremost, it is a way to expand opportunities for our students. It's tightly tied to fostering learner success as we think about creative ways to essentially extend our own reach through strategic partnering. It can happen within the University of Maine system. Well, it can happen across the campus, and it does. And it even could happen more fully, I think, in that context. But partnering with other institutions in the University of Maine system. So you see a couple of reminders about things that we're doing and that we might wish to consider growing as we look at their success. The partnership with the University of Maine Augusta in the foundations area to help students be ready to move into their four-year degrees here or possibly at Augusta. And similarly with the University of Maine at Machias, our regional campus. We've introduced a new Pathways to Engineering collaboration with NROTC, and the Provost can tell you more about the details of that. It will bring us a small number of students, but it's a very interesting idea to help, again, expand our partnership there. We've announced that the nursing outreach to rural Maine will kick off next academic year, and we can learn more about that as people would like to know. But it's basically focused on providing access to nursing education opportunities at the University of Maine at Machias, a high need in Washington County, and our contribution to the much broader statewide effort to increase our capacity to prepare nurses in a very high need area. We are working to expand our partnership with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, so this is moving beyond the rest of the system and more toward our partners across the state. These turn out to be extremely important for us in a host of ways. We are a statewide university, and we'll come to a slide about that, which means that we need to be sure that our research, our engagement, our community involvement, our educational opportunities are available very widely in the state. In good partnership with those of us who are here in Orono. And then finally, a national partnership. We're a lead university. We are the lead university in what's called the Northern Cluster of universities working on this APLU effort called Powered by Publics. It's very much focused on student success and how to scale up effective practices toward helping support student success. So we're beautifully positioned through the work of the First Year Student Success Initiative and other efforts to say University of Maine can be a place that will help other land-grant universities that are like us actually implement these effective practices. And so we have a nice leadership and partnership role to do that. Similarly, our work together with the University of Maine at Machias continues, and we've heard from their head of campus, Andy Egan, about his commitment to mutualism, this idea that this partnership is beneficial for both campuses, for the people on both campuses. And stay tuned fairly soon, I hope, for some announcements about how we'll move next toward the expansion of our academic partnership there. We've been working in the last year or so in a very focused way on the operations areas, the administrative areas. That's coming along very well. Now moving more firmly into the academic side. And that's coming up, as we said, right here in phase 2. Creating and innovating for Maine and beyond, some very promising figures, as I highlighted these briefly earlier, but as we take a look, comparing ourselves to where we were in fiscal 18 and a year later now in 19, the requested dollars that are coming from all of you and our colleagues across the campus for external funding are up to $90.1 million thus far through December, and we'll get the next quarter on as soon as we can. The award dollars similarly are up in a big way, and that's just fantastic work here on the campus. So those are through through December again. And what's intriguing too is that many of these are large dollar value awards, which is good to know. I'm not exactly sure, and Cody could probably, could probably say more if we need to about how this kind of information affects our predictions about expenditures. Because the real key is to get the award, the requests out, to get the grants in, and then to spend the money. And so all of those are a part of the process, and it's very, very heartening to see where we are on that front. So congratulations to everyone involved there. Similarly, our revenues from licensing and other economic development kinds of initiatives are on a good upswing, and you can see those revenues starting to really take hold. That is due to the good work of Jake Ward and his office and staff, because we're really now starting to see this as a central part of what we do here at the University of Maine, and so that will, we hope, just continue along. We have a partnership that we can point to with every other campus in the system, and I would like to see more of those as they make sense. And so we can talk about our regional partnership with Machias, the Foundations program that I just mentioned, the Graduate School of Business with USM, the Masters of Ed in Instructional Technology between us and Farmington. We provide research and administrative support in Fort Kent, and also we have some shared faculty positions at Presque Isle. This is just a sampler. There's much more that goes on here that we could add to this map, but I've started to use this and encourage others to use it to be very clear that we see ourselves as a key partner across the state for our sister institutions within the system. And similarly, we're still playing with the great infographics here, but to give a sense of where we are located. And we're always open to hear more ideas from you about things that we could add. I thought we needed test tubes or beakers or something to signal our research collaborations, but we can probably think of other icons. So things are really very healthy. I think the budget work has been done very, very well and very, very carefully by a lot of people involved in making hard decisions and trying their best to balance where we are headed with these challenges in putting a budget together. So stay tuned for the process. The next year will be similar, but perhaps even more emphasis on how we're able to show that the strategic vision and values work is actually driving the budget forward. With that, we're open for discussion. I just want to thank everybody who has worked on this budget, who has presented this budget, because we've had a lot of opportunity to talk about it with many groups, and also to all of you for all the great work that you do here. So we can pause now and hear your further questions or thoughts.
So the typo, Mike, is in the lower left-hand quadrant. The fixed costs are off by $1 million. So we'll fix it before we post it to the president's website and fix the November one.
This is not an efficient way to do
So
this.
did that affect the deficit total too? No, okay.
It's 1.6.
So did everybody follow that? I knew Claire would have it very quickly.
It's right there. It's at 5.8 to add up to 1.6. This
Should we
number,
6.8?
yeah. So it's in compensation and
Okay,
shared
it's 5.8.
services.
Okay, and it's off by $1 million.
The
Right.
fixed cost, it's the 6. Should be a 6.
Should be a 6. Okay.
Oh,
That 5.8
okay.
should be a 6. Okay, because it all squared away so beautifully to be 1 million. There was a $1 million mistake.
I thought it just related to what Jeff said he wasn't gonna tell us. Just.
Now, like I could say something like it was just a small error, $1 million error. That sounded wrong. Questions, discussions, thoughts about process, areas where you'd like to know more, what we can add in the next presentation and so on. Yes, James.
Just curious how we're tracking on the FY19 numbers. So you base all of the FY20 numbers off of what we planned for FY19. How are those expenditures and revenues tracking compared to what we had estimated that.
So during the course of the year, we have to do forecasts 3 times. We have forecasts in November, we just did one at the end of February, and we'll be required to do another one in April. We're tracking well for FY19. It's tight, but we're tracking very well to complete the fiscal year on the budget that we were given.